Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. This is Dr. Patrick Lockwood. I'm here with my good friend,
Sebastian DeRosa.
And this is the Alchemy of the Mind podcast, where we have conversations about culture. So, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about privilege.
Okay. So,
and the concept of privilege and culture right now, I guess like privilege and shame.
Oh.
Because I think those are two, I think those two are pretty intertwined. Currently, at least with how privilege is being utilized in the mainstream media, right? And those kind of like social justice, intersectionality kind of ways that it's being used. So the other day I was having a conversation with a friend when she was on a camping trip or whatever with some other women. And she brought up to me how, she was tripping, and she brought up how on her trip, she was thinking about, she had kind of a bad trip. She started thinking about how privileged she was because one girl there had a kid and the other girl there went to prison. And I was like, well, have you ever thought that maybe you've been lucky and that maybe her having a kid is a privilege as well because she gets to watch a child grow and have this experience? Maybe the woman who went to prison, maybe that experience in prison made her go, wow, I better change my life because I don't want to fucking end up here forever. So maybe in a way that was a privilege for her. So, and she really had never thought about it like that. And seemed to find that, I hadn't really thought about luck, but I think because this privilege concept is pushed so much within culture right now, that was something that kind of resonated into her trip. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a kind of a minefield of a conversation topic because it's a very politically and emotionally charged idea that you can just be lucky. It's almost as if you're a bad person because there's this random happenstance that has favored you. And in fact, you're really not even a good person because you haven't suffered through the same bad things that unlucky people, unprivileged people have suffered through. It seems like it. So you're kind of automatically a demon if you are privileged, it seems like. You're almost bad, it seems like.
Well,
you can't just be lucky that it can't just be like a happenstance thing that she, didn't go to prison or she was born in a certain area or with a certain kind of set of, parents or whatever it was. Like, you can't just be lucky. It's also, the word privilege has this very, very negative connotation as if the fact that you have these things, you should not be grateful for.
Yeah, totally.
It's like something that you don't even deserve. Almost.
But I don't think that's really what privilege, that's this concept now that's being reinforced around privilege, right?
Right.
So what would you define like privilege? Like what would be a healthy explanation of privilege?
Probably some kind of favorable experience that only certain people have. And there's really no good criteria for why those people have that thing.
But they will say there's criteria for that, like you're white.
Right, no, exactly. And that's why I would say that's my definition, is it's some kind of favorable experience that a person can have for basically no good reason.
Yeah, well, and would that be basically the same definition of luck?
I think to a degree, but again, you can have privilege. You can have privilege and be unlucky. So you can, for instance, be a wealthy, I guess if we were to play the identity politics game, you could be a wealthy African American in the United States and have a moderately high IQ and all these supposedly good things, right? All these privileged things. And at the same time, because of your ethnicity and because of maybe where you grew up, etc., you're also lucky. I would say, because you could grow up in the inner city and just by random happenstance, you have these genes or you have these experiences or you randomly walk across a mentor and there you are with all this privilege, this power and privilege, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. And I think that you could flip both of those switches on and off. I think you can be unlucky and privileged, right? Mm-hmm. You can be randomly helped out by someone. Or you can be a poor Caucasian person, right? This is the Thomas Sowell thing. You can be a poor Caucasian person. And by dint of the fact that you're Caucasian in the United States, at least you're privileged. Even though you're poor, you live in a place with no opportunity for economic advancement, whatever it is. So you're unlucky, but you're also Caucasian, right? Yeah. So it's a really weird slicing and dicing of things where even semantics becomes a problem.
Yeah, well, and I think it's a thing too where someone, I generally think of luck more along the lines. I mean, there's like, lucky clover kind of concepts around luck. Mm-hmm. Right? But I think about it a lot of times as like intentional navigation, like, being naturally good with people, being gregarious, right? Being able to kind of navigate people in a way that produces good results back to you. Mm-hmm. Right. And I don't know, that would be like luck, but I think often that is what would be perceived as luck is simply someone who's really, good at navigating things. So there's definitely people of, that's why we see people who always obviously break out of stereotypes and break the mold because, how they navigate the people and the environment around them.
Yeah, I mean, extroversion is a highly heritable trait, comparatively speaking. So if you're more extroverted, you're more gregarious and you're, more capable, I guess, of navigating social circumstances, even difficult ones in some ways, especially if you're extroverted and conscientious. Mm-hmm. So there's some luck there and you have better opportunity just because of those things. You know? Yeah. Now, it's not to say that the environment can't beat you down.
Or you can improve through luck.
Or you can improve through luck, or you can improve through intention, or both, right? Yeah. So I think the conversation around privilege, I think, needs to be framed with a backdrop of luck, privilege, and intention. Maybe those are the three concepts.
Yeah, I like that. Right. What about the shame aspect that I mentioned earlier? Did you get my tie-in with that? Because I feel like the concept of privilege is used now to shame people.
Yes.
And to devalue people.
Absolutely.
Which is like literally based on devaluing them of their immutable characteristics. Simply that they are white or a male, then they are therefore privileged and they are less than. Which is funny because it's just history repeating itself. That's what people used to do. They used to shame like that based on race, but it was reversed, but not, they didn't call it privilege.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's the kind of thing that shows up a lot in modern public debate nowadays. The famous example in my mind, I don't know that it's famous, but the one in my mind that always comes up is the monk debate, where it was Stephen Fry and Jordan Peterson versus Michael Eric Dyson, and I forget the woman's name, but they were debating the concept of political correctness, I think it was. And at some point, Jordan Peterson gets frustrated and Michael Eric Dyson comes back against him. Well, look at you, you're just an angry white man or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like a hateful, angry white man. It's like, what?
That guy, I mean, him and his like word salads of big words try to
yeah. It's just...
There's a little room temp action going on right there.
It's so sad that we are in a world where we can, even as an academic exercise of showing just how stupid and incendiary racist remarks are, he can get away with saying things like that because that was his intention. Like, now you see how bad it feels and stuff. And it's like,
that's quite the privilege, isn't it?
Right.
Right, that he can get away with saying that stuff. It's always funny how like attracts like, and how these things that air themselves as one thing or the other. So the person calling out the other for being privileged and devaluing them actually has the privilege based on their skin color or their, of getting to do that.
Yeah. Well, and this
like,
is,
oh, that's like, what's her name? Fucking Kamala Harris in the debate. I watched some of that, and she just continues talking, cut off, and then she go, well, I get to speak on this because,
wow.
my color.
Yeah, I'm sure. And this is the problem with not only developing an identity based on shame, but also kind of, I think what we do a lot nowadays when it comes to these concepts of privilege and all the isms like racism, sexism, and all that stuff, what ends up happening is we keep vomiting our shame on each other. That's what I think happens. And as opposed to being able to have a compassionate and healing approach towards our conversations, if we're letting our shame run the picture, I feel put down, I feel less than, I've been told that I'm less than. If we use that as our motivation for talking to people, then we're going to end up vomiting vitriol on people. It's always going to be toxic and nasty.
Yeah.
Always. And it does not heal the country. It does not heal anybody at all.
Yeah, I think that's why from the beginning, since I started, hearing that concept back in, for me, it was probably 2015 or whatever, when I started that was one of the first things I started noticing. I was watching Into the Wild. Did you ever see that?
No.
Where the guy, it was supposedly a true story about a kid who goes off into the wild to live off nature, leaves his family behind, but he dies from eating some poisonous food. And I'm watching this show, and I've seen it before, and my guest is behind me, this woman, and she goes, well, yeah, whatever. He was just some privileged white guy, and I was like, what the fuck? You're devaluing his experience, because of this racial thing.
Because
right?
of the color of his skin.
Yeah, totally. Which is super freaking biased and racist, and then I was kind of like, well, actually a story came out later that showed that he was leaving a really abusive home and all this stuff they didn't show in the movie because the parents were alive. They didn't want to do it while the parents were alive. So a book came out and she's like, oh, it's yeah, well, maybe things are nuanced. Just go by a bias of someone's color. But I feel like that was the first thing those things that started occurring is kind of what brought me to my hanged man moment where everything turned upside down. The world as I'd perceived it completely shifted. I don't know if is there a formal word for when that happens?
When your consciousness shifts?
Is that individuation or self-actualization? When you just realize this, the nature.
I just call it insight. That's all I call it.
Oh, well, insight doesn't sound as fancy.
I'm not a fancy creature. You've known me for a minute now.
Yes, I have.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's weird that the world seems turned upside down for a lot of people, and we're lauding things that don't need to be lauded, and we are hating on things that don't necessarily need to be hated. It's just, again, this is the problem of a shame-driven approach to things. Shame always, Freud got this right. Shame always breeds narcissism, and it always breeds kind of a vile way of operating in the world. So when, there's so much shame, the ego has to become grandiose and do excessive big things in order to get the attention that it really believes it needs to heal itself. And when we keep saying these grandiose things like, it's because of our race or it's because of our IQ or whatever it is, we end up really putting ourselves in just this never-ending cycle of fighting and defending and sticking up for ourselves. And
now that's what social media is even way heavily reinforcing, which to me, that comes to a point, I don't know if that's reversible.
You don't think so?
I think so, by potential catastrophe, or something power being knocked out. I think there are factors that could definitely maybe shift that around. And I don't know. I guess people have, if we look back historically at panic, the Satanic Panic and these, rock band, but these things that have occurred historically, the witch trial, these outrage things, have they generally, I guess they've evened out, but those didn't have all this shit we have now with social media and all this stuff, heavily reinforcing. So
that's true.
Maybe though, because it becomes so reinforced and crazy, there's a section of people that just, and then there's way more people that are moderate that go, what the fuck are people doing? And maybe that idea gives me hope that that's a possibility.
Right. There really are a lot of moderately minded individuals that exist in the world, just like, regression to the mean and all that stuff. I think it's really definitely the case that we don't hear from a lot of moderately minded people. Because again, temperance and self-control and moderation,
too.
I mean, they don't want to be mobbed, and it's just not sexy. Those voices don't get promoted because they don't gain prestige.
Aren't we sexy?
We're super sexy. It's so sad that people can't see us anymore on our podcast.
I know. Maybe we'll treat them sometime.
Yeah, just once every while. Yeah. So yeah, I think I don't think it's lost. I don't think it's hopeless. I do believe that it's going to be a serious uphill battle to, let's say, make moderation sexy, to make acknowledging bias sexy, to make
well, acknowledging nuance too.
Oh yeah, nuance, absolutely. Acknowledging nuance needs to become very, very sexy. And that's why, when we talk about the concept of like privilege or luck, for instance, those are very, very nuanced ideas. Like luck is not just preparation plus opportunity. Like those two things about luck are true. I fully agree with that definition of luck. However, I think that there are certain environments where you're going to be more or less lucky. Like the random chance of meeting a famous person in LA versus the random chance of meeting a famous, movie star in Dubuque is probably not the same.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So there are definitely some circumstances. Variable. Yeah. It's very, very variable. Same thing with privilege. Like, again, you can be a white redneck or you can be an upper class, white liberal elite at Harvard. And your whiteness has a lot less to do with the influencing of your outcome there, right? Depending upon which circumstance you're in, the contexts are very, very, very different there. So It's really a matter of understanding, in my opinion, the nuances of what context we find ourselves in, because for me, context is key for nuance, for understanding things as complex as luck and privilege and identity.
Well, and I think a big one we've talked about before, and I spent a lot of time thinking about is perception and bias too. Because I think that so much of, so much of even how people can move past things or see them differently, like these things we're discussing, has to do with their perception of them. Do you see how I'm tying that together there, though?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely a problem of perception, because if our perceptual apparatus is already wearing hate-colored lenses or oppression-colored lenses or victim-colored lenses, then the information you're taking in is going to be distorted as you're trying to process it.
Yeah. And how much now? Our eyes literally can see. Sometimes like when these people, not that Erica Congresswoman bullshitter, but I think sometimes these people, the woman who, with the whole grocery store thing where the guy told her to get out of the... Yeah. But like, and she said he said, go back to it. Like, I think she was full of shit. Yeah. But I think some people literally like, they'll see someone in a red hat and their brain will immediately see a MAGA hat.
Sure.
Right. Because their perception and their bias is so screwing their perception. I don't know why I think I've reversed that. I meant bias to perception.
Well, it's a mutually reinforcing thing, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And the problem here is it's really a mentality. It's an attitude problem that we have, I think. There was a time when being wrong was okay. There was a time when not knowing was okay. Yeah. And I think that because of all the increased flow of information, thanks to technology and social media and all that stuff, we've kind of developed this weird, like, cultural value in the United States and the West of knowing things rather quickly as a means of moving up the prestige hierarchy. I think knowing things is perceived as extremely valuable. And I honestly would argue the opposite. I would argue that not knowing things should be more valuable the knowing things nowadays. That's my argument.
Well, and maybe acknowledging that. Once I was at this, we had an event, and this woman brought up to me how there are the things you know, and there are the things you don't know, and there are the things that you don't know that you don't know.
Right.
And I think people are not realizing that, well, there's a lot, that you don't know. You don't even have a concept of knowing. And I think for a lot of people that aren't intellectually curious, there's a lot that they don't know that they don't know.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So if you don't have that, it makes sense why so many people are swayed by all the propaganda and just go with the group.
Well, and to me, it always comes down to the idea that we are self-deceived by the idea that because we're humans, we are better than other animals. And I think we've needed that view of ourselves in order to, survive and strive and move up and all that good stuff. I seriously don't believe that we're much better than chimpanzees or orca whales or anything like that. And I know that sounds insane and radical, but the truth of the matter is we do all sorts of primitive animalistic shit all day long. And we see it through the biased perception that because we're humans and we can speak like we do.
Oh, for sure.
That we're better. And we're really not, So I think if we could own our animalistic tendencies, it might be easier to have less bias. Because, I don't think other chimpanzees are staring at other chimpanzees going, well, they understand that they're from a different troop than I am. Therefore, they're hating me for no good reason because I'm part of this other troop over here that's 20 miles away. They don't think that. Yeah. They think, oh shit, you're different. You're not from my troop. I don't know if I have to hate you and destroy you or if you're going to be a friend.
Yeah, which is really basically how people's brains operate in a lot of ways.
Yes. And acknowledging that, I think, would get us a long way because I think we live in this delusion that we should be fancy and sophisticated. And that's insane.
Well, that's just like people thinking they're not biased,
Right.
Well, usually those are the most biased people.
Right.
They're not conscious that they're biased.
Right.
And that's
exactly. Yeah, no. So
maybe that's the same thing too, where the privilege gets, kind of manipulated in this way of because there are people that are completely oblivious to the fact that they do have, maybe some privileges.
Oh, sure.
And that's in a way that can make it less, I think a lot of people are just grateful for their luck and their privileges, But I think that gets turned into a thing where it's like this, the person is oblivious to that, but then that's broad brushed across that's broad brushed across everything, across the concept of privilege, that people are oblivious to that and they need to have it called out.
No. Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the obliviousness, I guess if that's a word, is where we can do some work, right? And that's honestly why I think the people in the social justice warrior camp are doing what they're doing, because they really are trying to call out the obliviousness that supposedly exists on the part of the people who disagree with their ideas.
Yeah.
Which is why I don't have as many strong judgments as I used to about that camp of people, but I still have some strong judgments and biases against them, obviously.
Well, for me, I think one you told me before is that's helped me with that was shifting my lens to a lens of seeing them as sick.
Yeah.
That they have some, that they're sick instead of that they're demented.
Right. They're not crazy people. They're just sick, and if you felt like a victim, you would totally act out in pretty aggressive ways, right? You would definitely say, fight the power and screw so-and-so and fuck Donald Trump and all this good stuff because you're trying to protect yourself. You might be misperceiving the level of threat that you're under, but you're trying to protect yourself.
Yeah.
That's perfectly reasonable because that's literally how we're designed.
Yeah, totally.
So maybe some of the positive sides of dealing with privilege and dealing with luck and all that stuff is having an acknowledgement of bias that feeds our interpretation of privilege and luck.
Yeah.
Which would go back to the intention thing. So I think the uniting force between privilege and luck would be intention. Are we viewing it are we intentionally trying to view these things in a nuanced, biased, whatever way or not? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's probably the uniting force. And that's why I think a lot of the hippies use the concept of intentionality a lot, and it became this stereotype and trope.
Are you calling me a hippie?
You're a fucking hippie is what you are.
I talk about intention all the time.
You do. And every time you say it, I chuckle a little bit inside.
Well, I feel like fucking mindfulness is overdone.
It is. That's
why intention is a little less used. You got to fucking stay on the edge, man. You want to stand out with your words? Give me a new word. What's a new word? What's a better word than intention?
I have no clue.
Accountability.
Accountability that's a dangerous word. You're conservative, aren't you? Aren't you?
Accountability.
Yeah.
How dare you?
Right. Gun-toting conservative.
All right. I believe in accountability.
That's right. America. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, there's probably no good universal word for what we're trying to go after here, but I think intention or mindfulness or these are all good words. They've got some, tropes to them, but they're good words.
Yeah.
They serve the purpose. Oh, what else? What else about privilege and luck? I mean, is there a place where, the people who are concerned about privilege are right? Should we talk about that?
I don't think they are.
No place.
I don't think because of I think because of how it's used.
Because it's used like a machete.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe if it wasn't used like that, then I would have a different thought on that. But because of how it's utilized, because I get it. Like there's plenty of economic privilege, right? There's plenty of privileges that that is a privilege, right? That is part of that. I think that it's just, the broad brushes of privilege on race and these things, or on, the majority, because that's another thing, right? Majority privilege, the privilege of the majority, like, oh, you want to market something and sell it, right? What's the majority? Okay. Market the product towards the majority.
Right.
So, cause that's a lot of times people, will talk about like representation and these things, which is interesting to me. I never have ever cared to be represented by, especially the mainstream. You know what I mean? Like I don't have that. I have nothing seeking that. And so that's an odd, I guess with that, yeah, it's weird to look at them with this different mentality and see how they come to this conclusion too about privilege, the way they use it.
Well, that goes back to the bias thing too. I'm thinking of the concept of like, let's call it geographic privilege, right? So, you have the luxury of being born in the United States. That's more of a luck thing, right?
Yeah.
So there's the luck that you're born in the United States. And then as a result of maybe something that you do with the right intentions, you actually develop even greater geographical privilege because maybe you move to a city where there's better job opportunities, or, you find yourself doing other things that really put you in an even greater advantage, right? So I can see, I can try and meet people in the middle when they talk about the concept of privilege, because to the degree that it is luck driven, and then to the degree that it is intentional, I think if you can balance those two things out, you actually have a reasonable argument for, well, you got it better, but not necessarily because you did something special.
Yeah, and maybe that's that recognizing privilege, like as a tool of navigation in
Right.
those. Because I mean, like, yeah, geographical, it's like, thinking of, someone who's born, in a developing country that doesn't really have, like, they literally won't have the similar options that we might have here in America, maybe, or no?
Well, and this is where we have to have an extremely nuanced conversation, because there's a part of me that also thinks it's kind of arrogant to think that being born here is great or something of that nature. Because what if it's, and sounds like a totally insane thing, but what if you could live a perfectly meaningful, fulfilling life as a farmer somewhere in a South American country or an Asian, like, what if those people are having perfectly meaningful lives, and with all of our, let's say, Western arrogance and excess and greed, we're like, you should be like this. You should always have perfect.
Come enjoy this fucking chaos. Right? I mean, there really is.
I mean, they're eating enough food. Their water is not terribly bad that they're not dying. They're
that's all been changing. We do know that things like famine and water supply has really, grown and exceeded, and not having as many issues with disease and things.
Right, absolutely. And some of that's thanks to the technology that's created in the Western world that makes it, so in that case, privilege has kind of helped people live better lives, whether they have privilege or not. Right.
Yeah. Interesting.
So it's one of those really weird nuanced things, because on the one hand, I'm like, yeah, totally. Some people have I cannot stand how much movie stars and sports figures are paid. And it's not because I'm jealous, because I don't care if I'm broke. I don't care if I'm wealthy. I'll be happy no matter what.
Yeah.
What I care about is that we have placed value on those prestige gaining behaviors above kindergarten teachers.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
And nurses and people who are responsible for the well-being of society. Yep. Not that sports is bad, because we need to play. I did a video on it. We need to play. We badly need to play. We all need to play much more.
Yes, more
but
play.
putting that much value on play seems absolutely insane to me.
Well, and that's also part of the idea of status. That weird status culture.
Yeah.
And those aspects of it. Oh yeah, it's just like celebrities too. Like, what the fuck? They're here. We're gonna pay you really well for brainwashing people.
Right. What's funny is most of us probably aren't big fans of celebrities. We think they're trashy or something like that. But then at the exact same time, what was it? Fucking Kim Kardashian got into the White House and kind of pushed through the prison reform bill. Is that the truth? I think that's the story that happened.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's so on the one hand, everyone can't stand her because she's just this thought that has money for no good reason, essentially, other than her giant ass. And then on the other hand, she goes and she gets Donald Trump to sign this prison reform bill or something like that. So there's this weird dichotomy of it's kind of a mind fuck for me. It's what are we doing here?
Well, and that'd be the nice thing, is if more, if they actually, more of them utilize their status and power in these things to do good like that, but most of them don't. Most of them are
totally
caught up in their egos.
Yeah.
Black pilled, actually, this kind of made me think of it what you helped me recognize about my perception, right, in that regard to another country. Black Pill did a really interesting documentary. He does these videos where he analyzes old media or movies, and it was The Beach, and it was about the draw or the desire or the allure of the exotic, right? And it's where people here will look at the other country and think, oh, they have it simple in their nature. They look at this thing as oh, let's go to India. And, again, it kind of featured the side that is which is funny because it's the side that's been marketed to them by, by a capitalist, by that system to give them this allure that this is, oh, imagine this life.
Yeah.
So it's really funny how the interplay between the two versus what someone else might think there, who's living in a developing country who has a simple life and they just love it. And they've got, God, I would never want to deal with, what's going on in the US. But then of course there's going to be other people with a completely different view who that's simply what they desire.
Yeah. It's so weird. It's so weird.
Very weird. Status in the media is I never had an interest. I've never been a person that was even in awe over a band or something. It's just something that, probably because of my experience with the group identity growing up, falling into the group in any of those ways doesn't seem to be something that have really fallen into.
Yeah, and I think that's probably both of us. I don't think either of us is necessarily looking for the limelight. I think the reason we're even doing this is just because we have ideas that we believe are useful. It's kind of that simple.
Yeah.
And if something in our dialogue helps people, great. I mean, what was it? What was the group of guys that I hung out with and did that chat with, the gay guys?
The
Gaytriarchy?
Yeah, that's it.
Gaytriarchy. So I did that interview with them, and one of the main interviewers is so it would be okay with you if YouTube just took down your channel and, all of a sudden your stuff never existed anymore. I'm yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to help people. If people don't want to learn or don't want to hear my ideas, that's perfectly fine. There's no ego in this game for me. It's if I become as big as, Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, great. If I don't, great. So long as people are getting some kind of benefit from it, great.
Well, and
take it
plus,
down, whatever.
there's alternatives and there's ways, there's other ways, and you got your shit backed up. There's other ways for you to get a message out there. So it's like, whatever, if YouTube gets to that point, which we've known is coming for a while anyways. So it's like, why not just be prepared? I was actually having a conversation, and it was so frustrating me because I went to look up, I was trying to look for a video by Styx that he did about basically the lies that the media has propagated about Trump on that he's a racist.
Mm-hmm.
I kept looking up lies about Trump on YouTube, and the results, all mainstream, all about Trump's lies. And literally, like, what I would write, it would revert around and give me this like bullshit mainstream narrative. And it was so, that shit's not what's being watched.
Yeah.
Such bullshit. And I was just like, fucking serious. And we know that's happening, like, not just there. That YouTube is Google.
Yeah.
That is across the board.
Yeah.
Search,
Yeah.
It's crazy. That's the illusion. Breaking it down.
Down
the illusion.
Yes. And that's why psychedelics are important.
They are. That's why we're pro psychedelics.
Absolutely. In moderation, being used intentionally. This is not the let's get wasted all day podcast.
But speaking of that too, on our next podcast, we are going to be discussing cannabis and the nuance of cannabis. Cannabis. You're the cannabis. And cannabis, intentional cannabis use, and cannabis habituation, and the negatives. Because, we live in a time now where, we had all the demonization around drugs. And then as cannabis went into the medical industry and now into the rec, there was this, this time where it's like, oh man, this is all medicine. The more, the better. Now it's kind of moved into that recreational, and now we're saying, well, maybe we should have the other side of the conversation. Yeah.
We're definitely going to have that conversation next week. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. Well, let's see. In summary, it seems like we've talked about privilege, intention, and luck, and that you can't really have privilege without luck, and you can't really have luck without privilege, I guess, would be one way of saying it. That there's lots of nuance, and that maybe the best way to go about it is to kind of intentionally explore the concepts as opposed to this automatic pilot, reactionary, bias-driven way of discussing the concepts.
Yep.
Maybe that is the solution.
That is a great summarization.
Okay, so here we are. We rambled again. We're talking about pot next week. That should be fun.
That'll be fun. We'll get really high before we do it.
Just get wasted. We'll have an Elon Musk, Joe Rogan experience.
It would be a really sad show. It would probably be a really sad show. I'd actually be really fun to see you stoned, but
oh god,
maybe we'll do that one time in the future.
No, thank you.
See you shine.
See me all goofy and not
coherent. That'd be like miraculous. I'd love to see a little short-term memory. That might be a benefit of pot for you.
I would totally forget something.
Meticulous memory.
Yeah, no, I know.
Well, that's why it works in PTSD. I mean, for trauma, right? Because it helps people forget.
It can. Yeah, we should talk about that next week.
One of the effects. Okay, cool.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So, again, this is Dr. Patrick Lockwood and
Sebastian DeRoja.
And this is the Alchemy of the Minds podcast. Please find us on minds.com. And support us there if you like. You can donate Bitcoin or whatever. And please, like, share, and subscribe if you have time. And we will be back with you next week to talk about pot, the ins, the outs, the good, the bad, and everything in between.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. See you.
Bye.